Is what is the Constitution of the United States, but that of Massachusetts, New York, and Maryland, there is not a feature in it which cannot be found in one or the other. In other words, they're really, we were talking about elections before, how there really aren't federal elections because they're just made up of states. You can almost argue that there's really not a federal constitution because it's made up of state constitutions. So just kind of keep that thought in mind. What else have you got as far as the terms are concerned? And like I said, I wanted to get into the articles fairly quickly. So if there's anything else, yeah, Connor, go ahead. Republican. From the state constitutions, it mentions in there that the one thing that the federal constitution guarantees is that each state government will have each state will have a republican form of government. So it doesn't really say much more beyond that, but it says that it guarantees a republican form of government. And that's it. Not a democratic one, but a republican one. Yes, Kia.
So I know the preamble.
Go ahead.
The preambles that's the religious preambles of the state constitution.
Yeah, we'll start getting into some of the connections here. And if you go back to chapter 3, if you remember when we were going through this, I had posted up here a little bit about sample preambles. And I had talked to you about this, and we had talked about this idea that technically speaking, some of the preambles of some of these states out here look a little bit illegal or unconstitutional because of the way that they reference religion. But the other thing that kind of gets mentioned in here is, you'll notice not just about things like God and different references, but you'll notice how they mention mountains and wilderness and all sorts of different things in there that don't necessarily make a lot of sense. So this kind of ties in, not exactly with straitjacket, but that other quote talking about the length of the constitutions. Because some of these things, like, we the people of Washington, grateful to the supreme ruler of the universe for our liberties, do ordain this constitution, or Virginia, good people of Virginia, in exercise of their sovereign powers, which rights do pertain to them and their posterity as the basis and foundation of government. Several of these are actually really, really close to the federal preamble. But there's a lot more in them, too, than just what the federal Constitution preamble is. And it seems like some of these seem really illegal because of the religious references that are blatantly in there, not just once, but maybe sometimes several times. So look these over. I'm not going to ask you what is said by the Montana Constitution, not to that point, but we might talk a little bit about some of the things that more generally you see in those preambles. Let's put it that way. What else have you got? I'll bring the list for you, Keon.
There's one more in chapter 3 and chapter 4. There's just a few more, and then I want to go quickly. Like, you don't have to explain it. I don't want to waste time. Amendment process. That's fine. That's just for the state government. Okay, so for chapter 4 elections, so we have recall, we have primary, Article 1, Section 4. That's fine. General election. That's fine. 17th Amendment. That's fine. 19th Amendment. That's fine.
No, you don't want to waste time.
Yeah. 24th Amendment. That's fine. Okay, so just all good. Then that's fine.
Yeah, if you look at chapter 4, and a lot of these that we went over today, these are really straight definitions. And these would probably translate pretty good into multiple choice questions. What I would ask you to do on some of these is maybe link some of these to the mayor's notes. And I don't have these typed in there just yet, but do you remember what the mayor said about when she wanted elections? Go ahead.
She wanted them to be not on general elections or national elections, because then people come out specifically for the local election and focus on the local election issues rather than, this person has a D next to their name or this person has an R next to their name.
Yeah, she wanted open elections. She did not want them to be partisan at all. But the other thing that she'd said was, and this is something that I think the chapter really disagrees with her on, so be careful with this. The chapter actually says that if you had local elections during presidential elections, the local elections would have higher turnout because more people would go to vote for the presidency. And she actually said that she didn't like that because she said that if you have local elections during presidential elections, that ultimately people don't pay as much attention to the local elections. Go ahead.
With going off of that, it's if you have them at the same time as the national elections, more people show up to vote, but when you don't have them, more people to show up to vote on the issues of the campaigns.
Right.
Rather than just, it's an election, we gotta go vote.
Yeah, she was kind of saying they get swallowed or they get forgotten because she doesn't have the budgets, none of the local people do, for the things that the national folks do. So yeah, keep that in mind, but that was something, and you'll be able to draw some linkages when I put the notes in there for the mayor. And let me stress to you, when I do put the notes in there for the mayor, which will probably be today or tomorrow, you'll notice in there that a lot of these notes are going to be set for multiple choice questions. So, you know, if it's kind of a sentence or two, it's much more in tune for a multiple choice. If it's longer, like some of these articles are, it's going to be much easier to write about short answers. Go ahead, Keon.
Last one, I'm not kidding, this is the last one.
Okay.
Amendment process, chapter 3.
Okay, yeah, I think
That's
you
just-
liked the amendment process before, but we'll go back to that now. What was the amendment process?
Yeah, and-
How did those work? Because there were two things that the chapter talked about that we had talked about right before spring break, I believe. Go ahead.
One of the ways was you had to start a constitutional convention to then develop, to write the amendment, and then it'd be voted on by the, I believe it was the people, then the next incoming, whatever state or whatever position it was, next incoming government.
Constitutional convention is one way, and that's a little bit rare, honestly. They don't happen as much as you would think, but bless you. And really the big issue, and I don't know that we talked about this, but I'll mention it now. The big issue is whether a constitutional convention is going to address a specific part of the Constitution or if they would be able to address the whole thing. Because you empower the convention to deal with something or all of it, and if they can just deal with one certain part, then you just vote yes or no on that certain part, and then it goes forward. Well, if they can deal with the whole Constitution, now all of a sudden they can really pick and choose, and are they going to just ratify the whole new thing, or at least push the whole new thing forward to the next step, or would they have to ratify each amendment that they added to the whole Constitution separately? You get what I'm saying. So it becomes a much messier process.
A line item veto.
The two things that I was really thinking about on this was the way that legislatures can propose the amendment process. Do y'all remember those two ways? One way dealt with a supermajority vote, and normally a legislature would ratify, propose with a 3/5 or a 2/3 majority vote. And then it would be ratified ultimately by the people of the state. The other way, though, was the successive legislature approach. And you didn't need a significant majority, but if you had a simple majority from one legislature and then an election happened and then a new legislature came in and they passed it with a simple majority, then at that point you've got your process done. And the logic behind that is that if you have two different legislatures, you don't need as high of a fraction ultimately to ratify. So keep that thought in mind. And one other thing that I wanted to make sure that I hit on too, and if I hit on this, I think it was very, very quickly, but there was a quote in one of the chapters, chapter 2, that dealt with taxes and services. And the basic idea of the quote was, everybody always wants their taxes cut. And if you talk to elected officials, inevitably they're going to say, oh, they're going to come up and talk to the elected official and be like, hey, I want my taxes cut. And then the elected official can come back and say, well, what do you want me to cut in order to deal with this money that you now don't want to pay? Everybody can always talk about, hey, I want more services, or hey, I want my taxes cut. But they can't ever seem to come back and give an elected official a specific thing to replace the revenue or to cut in order to justify your new spending. So keep that thought in mind too. Go ahead.
Can you give an example of what you would ask about an article? Because Brenna keeps asking me, well, what kind of question?
Well, let's deal with the articles. And now that Keon is done, we'll move into the articles. I'll just go ahead and close this down. But I will go ahead and start with chapter 1 on this. And you notice up here with chapter 1, we actually had a decent chunk of articles. So what I'll do on the exam is I'll probably break it up. And I'll break the exam up into a series of multiple choice questions that come from terms, and then a series of multiple choice questions that will come predominantly from the articles. And then from there, when you get to the short answers, it'll probably be maybe answer 6 out of 9, so you'll have some choice on there, and the vast bulk of those are going to come from articles. So go ahead.
Are the articles from the paper on the test?
No, and I've removed the paper, so you don't even have access to those anymore, so you don't have to worry about studying those. But if you remember Textilizer, it was about the first one that we did. Do y'all remember what New York was trying to do with that? Go ahead. Yeah, Lindsay, go ahead.
Oh, it's after you got into a car accident, the textilizer would enable police to see the search history on your phone to see if you had been or not search, activity history.
Your usage, your activity. So they wouldn't know
when you hit someone.
when you hit somebody. Yeah, the textilizer. I mean, it's based off of that idea of a breathalyzer. You know, you blow in the breathalyzer to figure out if you were drinking and you were intoxicated. Well, the textilizer is basically like plugging something into your phone in order to demonstrate if you were using it prior to the accident.
It might not be legal.
What's that?
It might not be legal.
It might not be legal. Go ahead.
You can't search somebody's cell phone even after they've been arrested without a warrant.
See, this is where it gets kind of tricky because they're trying to play with this, and a lot of people don't trust it because their sense was, okay, if you're going to be plugging things into my phone, how do I know that you don't have access to my pictures? How do you know that you don't have access to the things, that the text messages that I sent or whatever? This is supposed to just deal with activity. And so many states have made it against the law to use your phone when you're driving, that if you are using it illegally and then you crack somebody, then that's going to go a long way in dealing with liability. They're just testing it out, so it's not official yet that it's a real policy. They're excited about the prospects of it, but it does seem very questionable, you know, as far as needing a warrant, as far as searches and seizures, Fourth Amendment, you know, these kinds of things. Yes?
The most important to have to know about the articles are basically the two sides of the issue, right?
Tell me both sides. Tell me the story. Tell me the story of
Wants all the
these.
details.
Somebody in one of the morning classes said that, she said that I required you to know about all the flowers in the garden. I don't know if that's really accurate when you're writing these short answers, but show me what you know. Do y'all remember the excessive fine piece? Go ahead.
It was this guy who bought I forget exactly what, a fairly nice expensive car with the inheritance from his dead grandfather, and he was a small-time heroin dealer.
Yeah.
And they confiscated his $60,000 or $70,000
Land Rover.
Land Rover.
Yeah,
That's it.
Land Rover.
Because he was a small-time heroin dealer.
Yeah, basically what it was I think they busted him with a few $100s worth of heroin, and when they had done this, a lot of states have a policy where you can ultimately confiscate something that is in use with the context of the crime. So when they busted him with this, and let me make sure that I have the right dollar figure on here, at $225 of heroin, and it was a $42,000 Land Rover SUV. Well, if you remember on this, constitutional case on excessive fines. The Fourth Amendment prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures, but there's also excessive fines that are involved in this as well. And this is an article from November 2018, so this is just a few months ago. Believe it or not, there's not really a statement of law that deals with excessive fines. So he's basically suing and saying, listen, if I got $225 worth of heroin and you're confiscating my $42,000 vehicle, that's an excessive fine. I should get my vehicle back. And this has not been ruled on yet from Indiana, but it's pending, and it's probably going to be ruled on maybe by the time we leave.
It's
We'll
already
see.
been ruled.
Has it?
Yeah, by
What-
the Supreme Court.
What'd they say?
They said it's unconstitutional that the Supreme Court of Indiana did it, and they just overruled it.
Okay, I'll double check on that, because I don't know that we talked about that in class, but I'll double check on that. Anything else that you got from this one or any